wealth and power and the state that the voices of everyone did not exist.
At the very heart of America's strength lies the boundless love and quiet power of mothers. We are the most devoted teachers, gently nurturing empathy, inspiring dreams, and guiding our children towards goodness. We help them rise with courage when life grows difficult. In every hug, every story read at bedtime, and
a Fox News alert. Passengers.
It's the greatest privilege of my life. There are so many exciting things that happen in life, but there is nothing more exciting than getting to see the world through the eyes of kids as they're.
Charlie would often encourage people, like Dr. Arnn said, to get married young, not rushed, but young. I just want to encourage all of you, to the men, you are called to provide, you are called to lead, to anchor your families in strength and consistency. To the women, you are called to nurture, to build, to shape lives with wisdom and endurance. Charlie would often encourage people, like Dr. Arnn said, to get married young, not rushed, but young. But I just want to encourage all of you, to the men, you are called to provide, you are called to lead, to anchor your families in strength and consistency. To the women, you are called to nurture, to build, to shape lives with wisdom and endurance. Charlie would often encourage people, like Dr. Arnn. And as you continue forward in life, I want you to kind of embrace the similar blueprint of my husband, where he loved to point out that God made us purposeful beings. And continue forward in life with clarity and intention, and you will come to understand that life is not defined by the abundance of options, but by the weight of the choices that you make within them. And those choices, more often than not, are not dramatic or obvious, but quiet and compounding, forming the blueprint of your lifelong before anyone else can see what you are building.
Officers behind us. It's kind of interesting to me that, you know, they still showed up every single day knowing that they were still shut down. I mean, 76 days the Democrats kept the Department of Homeland shut down, yet they still wanted their backyard protected. They still wanted to make sure that when I became Secretary of Homeland, my number one focus was to get us funded. Hands down, that was my number one focus. 70–80% of my time was trying to negotiate a solution to reopen. At the end of the day, just for the sake of I actually don't even know why it would be nice, but I am. I shouldn't be, but I am. Just for the sake, I don't want to throw the guy underneath the bus right now because I don't want to do this again September 30th. But there was someone in House leadership and in House and Senate leadership with the Democrat Party after we negotiated for almost 5 weeks with them. Went from 3 issues that they had all the way up to 9 issues. Tom Homan and I had worked.
For Keir Starmer to come on to the stage at Labour Party headquarters. We're going to cross to our correspondent Ben.
Well, we know what he's aiming to do. This is a make or break speech. There's no in-betweens here. He can't afford to get this wrong. He absolutely needs to convince his very disgruntled, frustrated, angry, mutinous MPs after these disastrous results of the local elections in England and also in Scotland and Wales. So yes, you're right, we're getting a few glimpses of some of the lines that he's going to be saying. He's going to vow to, quote, face up to the big challenges after these disastrous local elections. He's recognized that actually 2 years in, it'll be 2 years in a month's time. Remember, in July 2024, when he stood just 2 meters behind me and said that he promised change, accountability, transparency. And it's that lack of change, that lack of urgency, really, that lack of landing their message, the multiple U-turns, of course, the real Reform UK victories across the country that is deeply worrying for all these MPs. They just do not see Keir Starmer taking them into the next general election. And this is why there are so many rumours really circling here in Westminster and across the country, not just up and down the country in pubs, but actually very much in constituencies. So many Labour MPs taking to the airwaves over the last 24 to 48 hours, bemoaning the fact that they've lost so many councillors, so many colleagues. So this is about Keir Starmer saving his job. And some of the things that he will be talking about is very much a closer relationship with the EU. But I understand he will stay within his and the Labour government's manifesto and their campaign promises and their government policy. And that is not to cross those red lines. No rejoining of the EU, no single market rejoining, and no customs union rejoining. So it will be interesting to see if he fleshes out that closer relationship with the EU. At a time, of course, with the Iran war, where we know the French President Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer have been closely working together, really, and cooperating with other countries, trying to see what will happen after the reopening at some point in the future, possibly distant, of the Strait of Hormuz. There will also, I understand, be very much talk of defense, about energy, about growth. But then where is the growth? That is one of the major problems. And certainly the war in Iran and the effects it's having, whether it's supplies, or fertilizers, oil prices, gas prices, all of that affecting the cost of living. The cost of living that is uppermost in seeing the results in the ballot box. That is one of the issues, the top issues in this country that most people are hurting and really struggling to pay their bills. So as I said, a make or break speech that should be starting imminently somewhere. We don't know the exact location in central London. And after that, it will be the reaction to that speech that will be absolutely fundamental, because Catherine West, previously a low-profile Labour MP, told the BBC a few days ago that if she was not convinced by the speech, she would set off, she would put her name down, and she will seek to get 81 other MPs to start that leadership challenge. In effect, in some ways, although no formality has done it, that's already started.
Yeah, we've just seen Keir Starmer walk into the into this rapprochement, if you like, with the European Union, because of course the party that did quite well in those local elections, or one of the two parties that did says that it is thinking about sending its air defense experts to the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, in order to secure their airspace against future threats.
The investigations proved that this was the result of Russian electronic warfare deliberately diverting Ukrainian drones from their targets in Russia. I reaffirmed Ukraine's willingness to work together with Baltic nations and Finland to prevent such incidents, including with the direct involvement of our specialists.
It is, again, a ludicrous statement, given that Ukraine itself has sent those drones repeatedly through NATO airspace, Lithuania, again, Latvia, Estonia, even Finland, and the authorities in those countries have come under attack internally for allowing the overflight of those drones, because civilians, obviously in those countries, understand that that makes them a target. Either those drones could crash into their houses, into their cities, or Russia could respond by shooting down those drones, or indeed other measures that it deems necessary in order to stop Ukrainian drones from using Baltic airspace to attack Russia. All in all, another escalation in a long line of such, and one that has eventually
it's about taking responsibility to explain how, as a political and electoral force, we will be better and do better in the months and years ahead. Because we are not just facing dangerous times, but dangerous opponents, very dangerous opponents. This hurts not just because Labour has done badly, but because if we don't get this right, our country will go down a very dark path. So just as I take responsibility for the results, I also take responsibility for delivering the change that we promised, for a stronger and fairer Britain that we must build. I take responsibility for navigating us through a world that is more dangerous than at any time in my life. And I take responsibility for not walking away, not plunging our country into chaos as the Tories did time and again, chaos that did lasting damage to this country. A Labour government would never be forgiven for inflicting that on our country again. I know that people are frustrated by the state of Britain, frustrated by politics, and some people frustrated with me. I know I have my doubts, and I know I need to prove them wrong, and I will. So let me start on a personal note. Like every Prime Minister, I've learned a lot in the first 2 years in the job. In terms of the policy challenges that our country faces, incremental change won't cut it. On growth, defence, Europe, energy, we need a bigger response than we anticipated in 2024. Because these are not ordinary times. And this is a political challenge just as much as it's a policy challenge. Delivery is, of course, essential, but it's not sufficient on its own to address the frustration that voters feel. We're battling reform and the Greens, but at a deeper level, we're battling the despair on which they prey, despair that they exploit and amplify. And so analysis matters, but argument matters more. Evidence matters, but so too does emotion. Stories beat spreadsheets. People need hope. So face up to the big challenges. And we will make the big arguments, the Labour case, that only Labour values and Labour policies can ensure our country not only weathers these storms, but emerges stronger and fairer. And the Labour case, that neither Nigel Farage nor Zach Palansky offers our country the serious progressive leadership that these times demand. Of course, like every government, we've made mistakes, but we got the big political choices right. I mean, if we'd listened to the advice of other parties, right now we'd be stuck in a standoff with Iran, having been dragged into a war that is not in our interest, and I will never do that. Yeah. We have invested in our public services, in people, in the pride of Britain's communities. Difficult decisions funded that. But now, NHS waiting lists are coming down. Child poverty is coming down. Immigration is coming down. And we are rebuilding from the ground up. They were the right calls. And most of all, we stabilized the economy. The fundamentals are sound. And that matters because it puts us in a much better place to come out of the conflict in Iran stronger and fairer, and for living standards to improve after 2 decades of stagnation. But that's not enough. No. For the British people, tired of a status quo that has failed them, change cannot come quickly enough. And truth be told, I'm not sure that they believe that we care. I'm not sure they believe that we see their lives. That's tough to say. When you come from a working class background like me, it's hard to hear that. Because I do know what it's like to struggle and to strive. But what I take from it is that I've spent too much time talking about what I am doing for working people and not enough time talking about why or who I stand for. Because I can see how hard life has been during these decades of crisis. I can see that very clearly. My late brother Nick spent all his adult life going from one job to the next. The status quo did not work for him. My sister is a carer, working long hours on low pay, year after year after year. She didn't even get sick pay in the pandemic. The status quo did not work for her. For too long, we've ignored people like that. And there are millions of people in that boat, millions of people who don't get the dignity, the respect, the chance that they deserve to go as far as their talent and effort should take them. Millions of people held back because the status quo in this country does not work for them. I am fighting for them. We are fighting for them. I am their Prime Minister and this is their government. Because I know whose side I'm on. I'm on the side of working people just like my sister. People who work harder and harder, but who worry about the cost of living. They're not asking for the world. They just want to do the best for their kids. They want their town centres, the places they care about, to thrive. Their public services to work. And people in power to see their problems. And right now, they're worried sick. They turn on the TV, they see bombs falling. They go to the petrol station, see prices rising, and they think, how is this happening to us again? They say, how can I be paying the price for a war thousands of miles away that I don't support, that Britain isn't involved in? And it's not a new feeling, is it? For 2 decades, our country has been buffeted by crisis after crisis. The 2008 financial crash, the Tory austerity that followed it, Brexit, COVID, Ukraine war, on it goes. Our response is always the same. A desperate attempt to get back to the status quo, a status quo that failed working people time and again. Our response this time must be different. A complete break. We must make this country stronger. Take control of our economic security, our energy security, our defence security, and we must make this country fairer. Strength through fairness. That is my compass in this world. It is a core Labour argument. And in the coming days, you will see those values writ large in the King's speech. And you will see hope, urgency, and exactly whose side we're on reflected in everything we say and everything we do. So let me give you 3 examples today, starting with British Steel. Because what we did in Scunthorpe last year is one of the proudest things we have done in government. That plant was hours away from closure, and that is thousands of jobs gone. An entire region decimated, Britain's security exposed. And so we acted. Parliament was in recess, but it didn't matter. As a united Labour Party, we passed emergency legislation and we took control. And we must bring that same urgency to everything now, starting, appropriately enough, with Scunthorpe. Because steel is the ultimate sovereign capability. Strong nations in a world like this need to make steel. That's why we're backing steel in Port Talbot and across the UK. But in Scunthorpe, we've been negotiating with the current owner, and a commercial sale has not been possible. And now a public interest test could be met. So I can announce that legislation will be brought forward this week to give the government powers, subject to that public interest test, to take full national ownership of British Steel. Public ownership in the public interest, urgent government on the side of working people, making Britain stronger with the hope of industrial renewal. That is a Labour choice.
Keir Starmer, Minisitiri w'Intebe w'Ubwongereza nyuma yo gutsindwa mu matora, akaba ari kugeza ijambo ku Bongereza.
Remind you what Nigel Farage said about Brexit. He said it would make us richer. Wrong. It made us poorer. He said it would reduce migration. Wrong. Migration went through the roof. He said it would make us more secure. Wrong again. It made us weaker. He took Britain for a ride, and unlike the Tories actually, who at least had to face up to it, he just fled the scene. And now he'll talk about almost anything other than the consequences of the one policy he actually delivered. Because he's not just a grifter, he is a chancer. And so at the next EU summit, I will set a new direction for Britain. The last government was defined by breaking our relationship with Europe. This Labour government will be defined by rebuilding our relationship with Europe, by putting Britain at the heart of Europe, so that we are stronger on the economy, stronger on trade, stronger on defence, you name it. Because standing shoulder to shoulder with the countries that most share our interests, our values, and our enemies, that is the right choice for Britain. That is the Labour choice. And for our young people, also something more. Because Brexit snatched away their ability to work, to study, and to live easily in Europe. That's why I'm proud we restored the Erasmus scheme. But I want to go further. I want to make a better offer for our young people. Restore that hope, that freedom, that sense of possibility. And so I want an ambitious youth experience scheme to be at the heart of our new arrangement with the EU, so that our young people can work, can study, and live in Europe, a symbol of a stronger relationship and a fairer future with our closest allies. That is the Labour choice. And third, the greatest hope. The hope that every parent has of a better future for their children. And I want parents to feel that that is shared by their government. Now, my parents, don't worry, I'm not going there, but they didn't have a lot of money. And my mum was seriously ill for almost all of her life. But when they were in their later years, reflecting on what gave their life meaning, I could see that, as well as their hope in us, their kids, what comforted them was the idea that they contributed to a Britain that was getting better for young people, that kids now had a better opportunity than they did. And so I have always been driven by the idea that every child should go as far as their talent or effort takes them. It's a beautiful idea, shared widely across this country. We tell ourselves stories about it, don't we? Stories, not unlike mine, about the working class kids who do make it. I don't blame people for telling those stories. It's important to tell those stories. But it's not everyone, is it? So when I say every child should have the opportunity to go as far as their talent or effort takes them, I mean every child. I mean the kids who are growing up in poverty, the kids who have special educational needs, the kids who can't get a job, and the kids who are ignored, frankly. Society often only puts those who go to university on a pedestal. We don't really see anything else as success. And that is wrong, deeply wrong. So we will go much further on our investment in apprenticeships, in technical excellence colleges, in special educational needs. We will make sure that every young person struggling to find a job will get a guaranteed offer of a job, training or work placement. And we will go much further with our Pride in Place programme. Back the millions of people who give their time and their effort to young people in their community. We will back them, not just with money, but with power. And we will make sure that kids whose talent lies with their hands, kids who go to college, kids ignored by the state because politicians' kids don't go there. They will finally get the respect that they deserve in a stronger, fairer Britain. That is the Labour choice. These are just a few examples, but they show the urgency in hope and our direction. They show the Labour values we will be guided for. And they show, frankly, the lessons that we will learn. Now, other parties will draw different lessons. In fact, they already are. They want more grievance politics, more division, more pointing at Britain's problems, looking not for solutions, but for someone to blame. Now, that's fine if it's me, if it's politicians, that's the job. But increasingly, it's not. It's other people in this country. And I don't think that's British. That is not the decency and respect that we are known for. But it's here. That politics is with us now. And you'll see it again on Saturday. Designed to confront and intimidate this diversity and this diverse country. That is why this Labour government will block far-right agitators from travelling to Britain for that event. Because we will not allow people to come to the UK, to threaten our communities and spread hate on our streets. This is nothing less than a battle for the soul of our nation. And I want to be crystal clear about how we will win it. Because we cannot win as a weaker version of Reform or the Greens. We can only win as a stronger version of Labour, a mainstream party of power, not protest. And I also want to be really clear on this, because I will never stop fighting for the decent, respectful, diverse country that I love. I will never give up on the hope we can unlock in this country, the hope of renters for security in their homes, of workers for fairness at work, of public services free from austerity, the hope of European solidarity, of community pride, of the people who paint over the graffiti that is racist, a country taking control of its future, our spirit unchanged, our resolve unbroken, the hope of a country that can and will become a stronger, fairer Britain. That is the hope I'm fighting for. That is the hope we are fighting for. That is the Labour choice. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Деятельностью такого формирования, как русский добровольческий корпус. И мне стало интересно, что же это за структура.
The news update. United Kingdom Prime Minister Starmer vows to put Britain at the heart of Europe. United Kingdom local election results were very tough, Prime Minister Keir Starmer admits. United Kingdom, if we don't get this right, our country will go down a very dark path, Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
World we live in now, we need a bigger response than 2024. It is a different world, and an acknowledgement that this isn't the first shock the country's been through with the Iran conflict. We've had plenty of those in the last 20 years, but every time the government of the day has tried to get back to a status quo that doesn't work. And we're not going to do that this time. That is the urgent task facing our country. We were elected into office to change this country, to bring about the change that is needed. The frustration that has been spoken about is a frustration of at least 20 years, if not more. That is what we're charged with changing. That is what we will change. In relation to Andy Burnham, obviously any future decision is for the NEC. Andy's doing a great job as mayor in Manchester. And I actually work really well with Andy, and I'll give you two examples on Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is really important for the Northwest. We are working together on that project. But equally, we've stood together to support Manchester, the community, when we had the terrible attack on a synagogue last year. Andy was the first person I phoned, and I went straight to Manchester to work with him on our response. So we work very well together, but the actual decision will be one for the NEC. Thank you, Chris, very much. Beth, from Sky News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Back in 2021, when Labour lost hundreds of council seats in the Hartlepool by-election, you thought about resigning as Labour leader, explaining, this is quoting you, "I didn't feel I should be bigger than the party." But these results, this moment, is so much worse than then. You've lost nearly 1,500 councillors, 40 councils, you've lost Wales. Haven't you, for one moment, thought you should step aside in the interests of the party and country? And if you haven't, why haven't you? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Beth. I think what we witnessed with the last government was the chaos of constantly changing leaders. And it cost this country a huge amount. A huge amount. And I'll tell you who paid the price. It was working people. They paid the price of this. They are still paying the price of this. A Labour government will not inflict that on our country again. We were elected with a mandate to change this country because of what had gone before. And that is what we will do. Yes, I acknowledge the frustration. Yes, I acknowledge the results are tough. Yes, I acknowledge that we lost brilliant representatives across the United Kingdom. I have a responsibility for that. But I also have a responsibility to deliver the change that we were elected and that we promised this country. And I'll deliver on that. Thank you very much, Dave. Vic is a rock, and we talk everything through together, as you know. Robert Peston from ITV.
Prime Minister, these were arguably the worst election results for Labour in 100 years. And, I spent all weekend, as you'd expect, talking to your MPs and ministers, and, most of them said to me that they do think your time is up. So what would persuade you that you're not the best person for this job? And just on this issue of this is no longer the time for incremental change, when you were elected, we'd had 15 years of no growth. We'd had Putin's war that led to the worst energy spike in history. Many would say Brexit had failed. Why didn't you get it then?
Well, Robert, look, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I've got some doubters, including in my own party. And I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I have to prove them wrong, and I will. I had my doubters when I took on the Labour Party. I had my doubters who said we couldn't change this party and make it capable of winning an election. And I proved them wrong. And when we did that, I had my doubters who said, you can't lead us to a general election victory after the loss in 2019. It was so bad. It's not possible. And I proved them wrong. I'm going to prove them wrong again. I also feel a deep sense of personal responsibility to deliver on the mandate that we won at that 2024 election. The first Labour government for 14 years that had to come in and clear up the mess and build a better Britain. That is what I came into politics to do, and that is what I will deliver. Thank you very much. And Robert, the second, on the incremental. Look, you heard what I said about Scunthorpe. This is an example of the urgency and the pace and the type of decisions that we need to make. The same with Europe. A bigger response, a bigger argument that has been made before, because we're living in different times. The Iran war comes on top of all the other crises we've faced for 20 years. We have to learn the lesson. Every single time in the past, we've simply tried to get back as quickly as possible to a status quo that didn't work. We can't do the same again. That's why we need a bigger response. Thank you very much, Robert. I've got Catherine Foster.
Thank you, Catherine Foster, GB. So the Labour Party was founded to represent the working class, many of whom voted for Brexit because they felt left behind. You've said yourself that the status quo is not working, but you're standing here in London and you're promising more Europe. You lost so much of your core vote in the Red Wall, in Wales, in Scotland, because working class communities feel that the Labour Party has abandoned them and that you don't get it. Are they wrong?
Well, Catherine, thank you very much. On Brexit, the reason I reminded everyone what Nigel Farage said is because that was the promise he put to the country. That we'd be stronger, we'd be richer, we'd have lots of money for the NHS, immigration would come down, and it all proved to be false. And he doesn't take any responsibility. He's not going back to the country now saying it was a good thing, you've all benefited. He'll talk about almost anything else apart from the consequences of the one thing that he delivered for the country, Brexit. He doesn't want to talk about that. And there's a reason for that. It didn't help working people. It turned out what he said wasn't true. That's why he doesn't want to talk about it now. But we have to talk about it now. Because we have to address the situation we're in. We have to give this country a stronger economy, a stronger defence and security set of arrangements, given the world we are living in. And that's why I said what I said about being closer to Europe, and this government being defined by bringing Europe back together again, and Britain at the heart of Europe. Thank you very much, Catherine.
You felt the hurt.
and that he took responsibility. That came back again and again. So it's a mea culpa, very much saying, look, the buck stops with me, or the pound stops with me. He emphasized how dangerous the opponents were. He really focused in on that, and he said really that the stakes were very high if this Labour government didn't get things right. So he talked about, I mean, he mainly, you're absolutely right, attacked for the first time really fully Reform UK led by Nigel Farage. He said that they exploit and amplify problems, that what this country needs is hope. And he named Nigel Farage and Zach Polanski. Nigel Farage, as I just said, who leads the Reform UK party that did extremely well, gained many, many seats up and down the country in those local England elections and then the devolved parliaments of Scotland and Wales, and inflicted, well, thrashed basically the Labour Party, ousted them. Zach Polanski, who is the leader since last September of the Greens who've done their best performance, not quite as well as polls had predicted, but he said that these were basically very dangerous times, serious times, that would put leaders in new solutions. And he said he had made mistakes over the last 2 years, he recognized that. And he mentioned the war in Iran several times. He talked about how this government had reduced child poverty, reduced immigration, that these things were coming out, that it had stabilized the economy. And that although he had talked before about what his government had done, he'd not described enough and talked about enough how. He talked about a fairer Britain, a stronger Britain. He talked again about the urgency of acting. He talked and made a big announcement about British Steel. He said that this government would now go ahead and it would have full nationalisation ownership of British Steel. That is significant in the way of jobs and the message also that it sends. He attacked, again, Nigel Farage. He said that Nigel Farage, the quote, was not just a grifter, he was a chancer. So clearly he's taking on Reform UK very, very clearly, and Nigel Farage. He talked about how Brexit was wrong, that Nigel Farage had said that it would bring prosperity, that it would make this country richer. He was wrong, that it would make it more secure. It had made it weaker. So very clearly, and that's his explanation also as to why he is choosing and emphasizing the importance of a warmer, better, closer relationship with the European Union. Also giving hope to young people so that they will be able to travel and to study as previously when the UK was in the EU. But it's not about rejoining the EU. It's about a closer, ever closer relationship. He said that was going to be, that the UK would be at the core of Europe. And remember, as I quoted before, and as indeed the Prime Minister said, there's that upcoming summit in Brussels where we will probably find out more about that. So very clear. In the questions, I thought it was interesting when that journalist asked about why he was choosing to do that. And for the reasons I've just given and that the Prime Minister gave, that is why that relationship with the European Union is so important. Of course, a lot of that programme of legislation we will cover on Wednesday for the state opening of Parliament, when the King will go to Parliament, open Parliament, make a speech in the House of Lords, and basically announce what the government proposes to do in the way of legislation. And this is a Prime Minister who's fighting for survival. There is a different tone there. There is an acknowledgement of mistakes, and there's a real desire to try and convince people and persuade, as he needs to do, those MPs, or there will be a move, possibly by the end of today, to start some sort of leadership challenge.
Yeah, we've just got 30.
Iran was helping to protect him because of the difficulties in the markets and and he really appealed to that these are serious times, not a time to leave chaos, and that he takes responsibility for what he's done, and he takes responsibility for what he will do, and that it's absolutely, he's showing that he really wants to be better, do it more urgently, more hopefully, and help people who are frustrated and who feel left behind.
Anything, thanks very much.
For a high-stakes visit to China, but the war
for years now. So while the rest of Asia really struggled on the energy front, Beijing was actually in a position to help countries like positioning itself as a really stable energy partner. On paper, the economy grew at 5.3% in the first quarter. Most of that strength, though, was concentrated in January and February, and it's still quite early to tell the full effects of the war on China. There are some warning signs already. China's export figures plunged in March whilst imports surged. That's because the closure of the Strait of Hormuz weakened global demand while pushing up the cost of raw materials. So manufacturing has become much more expensive, which means companies' profits are being squeezed while unsold goods start piling up. In warehouses, manufacturing, of course, is about a quarter of China's GDP, so a hit to the sector is a hit to the entire economy. Car sales also tend to be quite a good indicator for economists, and those plunged 26% in the first 3 weeks of April, those mostly dragged down by a slump in gasoline car sales.
and can be
by launching investigations into each other's trade practices. But the damage, of course, of kind of a year of trade war has taken its toll, and some analysts warn that China's growth target of 4.5% might be hard to hit.
Let's see what comes out of that meeting.
Водилось канун выборов, кому-то нам это не объяснялось, что это вот это, потому что нам непонятно было. То есть мы понимаем.
of just watching what happens?
Yes, except that in the longer term, if the war continues for longer, then the Chinese will have to pay a very significant economic price to it, because China is the single largest trading nation in the world, and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz in the longer term will have a stronger impact on the Chinese economy than on any other. And in the short term, the existence of the huge strategic oil reserve can only deal with the short-term shortfall, but not a long-term situation.
And when it comes to trade, are we likely to see a breakthrough on that front or get an extension of the trade truce in place?
Oh, I think the chance is that both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump wants to do a kind of a deal in the trade front. The Chinese understand Donald Trump pretty well, and they know that Donald Trump is out there to do a deal and is less concerned about the substance of the deal. So they will present something that will enable Donald Trump to declare that he's got a deal, a good deal for America, and for something that Xi Jinping can also say he's got a good deal for China. But whatever China agrees to may not be fully delivered when the time comes.
And will the ongoing war in Iran affect U.S. strategy vis-a-vis Taiwan?
Probably not hugely. Taiwan is seen by the United States as of a kind of strategic importance that, for example, Ukraine does not figure in the Trump administration's calculation. And the United States will see Taiwan as something that is central to the competition with China. So there is probably not going to be a huge change for that. And the Chinese will also see that the Americans are not going to let Taiwan go easily, and therefore they will not take the risk of taking military actions against Taiwan simply because Donald Trump is distracted in the war, over the war in Iran.
Interesting point. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
В боях в марте 24 года как раз в районе села Козинки. Я знаю, что это была именно медийная операция, потому что ничего там не светило, за исключением медийности. То есть, осветить, грубо говоря, что вот мы зашли, мы такие классные, вот посмотрите на нас, вот, просто осветить себя в СМИ, там, где-то в интернете.
What does personhood and selfhood look like when you're sort of in between cultures and places?
How did your experience in Australia from when you were 13 years old on shape your work? Because, I mean, clearly you've made the country home as well.
It's very much home, but in the process of becoming home, there was a lot of assimilation that had to occur, and I use that term very carefully because for me, what assimilation meant was survival. So when I migrated to Australia, I was 13 years old, and to fit into that context and to survive in that context, I had to adopt a lot of Australian mannerisms and ways of being in an Australian culture, and in doing so, lost a lot of my Indian ancestral, lineage and cultural background. I almost discarded that in order to survive in that system. So for me, the work, comes from that place, it's generative from that place, or, what it means to be or call the place home, but also have some tensions underlying that.
Is that why your work, the subjects in your work don't have faces, don't have identities?
Yeah, that's partly the reason. I think that the figures that I portray in a lot of my artwork are these colonial era figures that we've probably all seen over the years. I studied them at art school. So to rob them off their faces is to rob them of the sense of their agency that they had over me. A lot of the admirals, kings, queens that I portray in my artwork are people that have direct consequence of my family's migration history, from India to Kenya to Australia, and it's therefore informed my identity. So they've had a lot of power over me from a long time ago. So to rob them of that agency is part of the process of why I do that.
I mean, your work speaks to me as somebody who's Indian, who grew up in different parts of the world. I'm just wondering, is your work accessible to everyone, to the border public?
I hope so. The feedback has
I think people that don't come from, backgrounds such as perhaps we do can still see that story and commonality to that story, because that story of colonialism has happened not just in India, it's happened across the world. So I think it's a story that speaks to a broad audience, but it's also quite nice and gratifying to see people from the diaspora, especially South Asian diaspora, reach out and feel seen in the works that I made. So for me, I had very little of that growing up, but to have that for me is special.
You said that when you were growing up in Australia, you kept your Indian identity hidden as best you could. I'm just curious, what was it like when you visited India? Did you feel the sense of belonging suddenly, or not?
I'd hoped to. So when I went there for an artist residency, and I'd really hoped to reclaim these parts of India that I had never really accessed throughout my childhood and adolescence. And I quickly, came to the understanding that I was never going to be Indian enough for India. While I appeared Indian, I had very Western mannerisms, ways of being, and operating in the world, and I quickly found out to not be from that place. So for me, it was about realizing that I actually was never going to be Indian enough for Indians themselves. And that was actually, an interesting process for me, because that's where my work comes from, is not being quite from India, not being from Australia, and finding that liminal space in between.
Now, Indians have become Australia's largest migrant group, overtaking the English for the first time. What does this mean to you, and is this something you're proud of?
I think it's always interesting, and I think I'm excited to see what this process of migration to Australia is going to bring, be it from Indian backgrounds, be it from British backgrounds, Chinese. We've got a storied history with that. I'm interested to see what it does to the project of multiculturalism in Australia. It's still a very young country, and we're still grappling with its First Nations history. So to have this confluence of cultures, ethnicities, backgrounds, identities, I'm excited to see how they sort of amalgamate themselves in that culture to form an Australia that's still trying to understand what it is itself as a country.
Any worries at all?
I think there's always worries, because minorities and communities that are coming into pre-existing frameworks always face backlash, especially when you have things like economic crisis, household crises. So I really do look at it from a very optimistic lens, in the sense that these people from these diverse cultures can bring so much to a country and reframe the idea of multiculturalism and how we use that term in an Australian context. That they can only add, I hope, to that culture rather than take away.
We'll see what happens. Thank you very much for doing that.
It's the greatest privilege of my life that I do